Okay, we're back with former Congressman Ted Deutch, the CEO of the American Jewish Community, the AJC. Hey, Ted, how are you?
I'm doing well. Nice to be with you. Thanks, Vika.
So, it's a historic time. We're in historic times, whether here in America, in the U.S., in the Jewish community, and as obviously Israel. So, I wanted to know about your thoughts about the relationship between these communities, and definitely ahead of the new administration. Where do you see this all going?
Well, the relationship. First, I think we start with the Jewish community.
Yeah.
The Jewish community at this moment in history, after October 7th, I think recognizes the importance of unity more than ever, and that's the connection between Israel and the diaspora, certainly, and the strong support from all across the United States and around the world for Israel, but also unity within diaspora Jewry. So I think the Jewish community is standing together, and as we look at Israel and Israel's place in the world, with a new administration, every new administration, there's an opportunity to take a look, determine where things stand at the moment, and then chart a positive course going forward. We always have that opportunity. This gives us that opportunity again. And in this case, it's with someone who served as president before. We know President Trump's record from his prior administration, and we look forward to building upon the Abraham Accords. We look forward to working with the Trump administration on strengthening Israel's place in the world and making sure that Israel is as strong as Israel can be in the face of this ongoing onslaught on seven fronts.
100%. So, in your opinion, as a professional, what do you think has been going well in the relationship between Israel and the United States, and what needs fine-tuning or possibly improving?
Well, the most important thing for all of us to recall is that October 7th changed everything. And we've seen since October 7th, the United States is standing up for Israel. The new administration is going to double down on support for Israel. I am confident of that. But we've also seen this onslaught against Israel in international forums. We've seen the terrible, the outrageous cases brought against Israel, brought against the prime minister, treating the prime minister the same way that they treat the heads of terrorist organizations. Standing firm in the international arena and showing American leadership is what's really so critical going forward. And we've seen this rise in anti-Semitism around the world, witnessed most recently in Amsterdam just a few nights ago, and American leadership there too, whether it's around the world or on our college campuses, is critical.
So the AJC, it's interesting, it's a fascinating organization because you do Jewish diplomacy on behalf of the American Jewish community, sometimes on behalf of the Jewish world. So you're definitely meeting with high-level leaders from around the world. And I'm wondering what the voices you're hearing about Israel during these times, whether it with meeting with heads of countries or senior officials at the UN, etc.
Well, on the diplomatic front, we continue to engage leaders all around the world. We've seen this in the conversations that we've had in New York at the UN General Assembly, where we met with over 100 senior officials. And we've seen this in the direct meetings that we have with prime ministers and foreign ministers around the world. And the one thing that's clear is that what Israel is facing now is not just something that affects Israel. What we always try to make sure every country understands and urge them to speak out clearly to make this point is that Iran's goal is the destruction of Israel. That's why it's using its terror proxies the way that it is. But its goal further is domination of the region and beyond. It's Iran that's providing the killer drones to Russia to use against Ukraine. That's a point that we make with the Europeans all the time. It's Iran that continues to look for ways to disrupt global trade through the Houthis. Again, something that affects everyone around the world. That's a really important point that we make and that the diplomats that we engage with understand. but that they really need to speak up about, even as so many others try to marginalize Israel and undermine Israel's place in the world.
So, Ted, as an Israeli, many times Israelis will vent about the fact that heads of different countries, heads of states, will speak about Israel in a positive way, definitely at the beginning of the war. But like after that, it kind of became a situation where, it's not as supportive, and feeling that we have lost their patience and that the world is no longer with us. So is that what you're hearing from these leaders?
Look, there are countries around the world that stand foursquare behind Israel, and we're grateful for that support. There are others who need to speak out more. Who sometimes, and I know, Tzviki, you can appreciate this. There are some who think that if they can point to that statement that they made on October 8th, that somehow they're permitted to take as unreasonable a line against Israel as they can, that they can call for Israel to take actions that would undermine Israel's defense, that they would suggest that Israel should stop a war before winning the war, that this is something that they would never, while they would never accept this for their own country, they impose against others. In those cases, we remind them that the ongoing war that Israel faces on 7 fronts, waged by Iran directly and Iran's proxies, is a war that Israel is waging not just on behalf of itself and the global Jewish community, but ultimately on behalf of Western civilization.
So what can Israel be doing better on that front? Because, in my own opinion, Israel is definitely not doing a great job with the media. We have spokespeople, but most of them are wearing, our IDF uniform. I'm wondering, from your perspective, how can the Israeli government do a more effective job in the international arena on the sense of media?
Well, first, I think we have to recognize what Israel is up against, which is a massive disinformation campaign coming from state actors and coming from media outlets, some that range from being unsympathetic, to put it mildly, to those that are state-owned, the Al Jazeera effect. And so it starts actually further behind. I think over the course of the war, the IDF spokespeople have actually gotten better at recognizing that the best thing to do is to simply talk about what Israel has been doing, what Israel has done to provide humanitarian assistance, what Israel has done to limit civilian casualties, all of the things that Israel is doing to both protect its own people and pointing out that
I agree with that, by the way. I think the IDF spokesperson's unit has actually been doing a tremendous job. And, I served there, and it wasn't that way when I served there. I wouldn't give it compliments a few years ago. I think they really stepped up. That said, they're wearing a uniform.
Listen, I think it would be helpful, just as the IDF officials tell us what's happening on a regular basis. It would be helpful for us to hear from other officials who are in Israel, who are engaged in the exactly the kinds of things that the world is suggesting Israel isn't doing, in providing relief, in implementing massive vaccination efforts, in making sure that what's happening through this war is seen through the lens of the country that is working so hard to protect its own citizens and limit civilian casualties, the civilians who are put at risk by the terror groups who would only love to see more of their people slaughtered. I think that's important. I don't want to miss the opportunity. Tzvika, I mean, we've now been talking for a while. There are 101 hostages still being held, 7 Americans. And at AJC, since October 7th, we have done everything we can to give voice to the hostage families, to make sure that elected officials in Washington, around the U.S. and around the world, continue to hear from those hostage families directly. The hostages need to come home, and the families' voices
100%.
Need to continue to be heard.
So I'm wondering, as someone who's so deeply involved with the Jewish community, how you see the evolution of the Jewish community in the past year. There's a rise of anti-Semitism, situations we would never ever expect to see 2 to 3 years ago. So are there any trends that you're seeing within the Jewish community?
Well, what's changing for the better is that there are countless numbers of American Jews after October 7th who finally realized that our future and Israel's future are inextricably linked, that you can't take for granted that Israel is always going to be safe and secure and strong. What happened on October 7th affected all of us. And so there is a huge groundswell across America and around the world, frankly, but all across America of Jewish community members who have stood up and said, I may have been involved in lots of other organizations outside of the Jewish community, but right now I need to focus on our own community and on Israel. And that benefits the American Jewish community. And what we at AJC hope as well is that our Israeli brothers and sisters see that support, feel that support, and understand the kind of advocacy that we're doing across our 25 offices in the US and 15 around the world, standing together as one Jewish community.
Right. So I was wondering, as a former member of Congress, you were a member of the Democratic Party. So I'm wondering if you have previous relationships with peers from your party, from the party you served as, and are in touch with them and speaking to them about Israel, about the Squad, about the ideology, about how to educate them about what's really happening, because it's very difficult to follow an entire year of a war in a different country. So are you doing that with your colleagues?
Yeah, listen, this is not new for AJC. I'm now fortunate to run a fiercely nonpartisan organization. So our job is to advocate for Israel and the Jewish people as strongly as we can in every way we can.
Right.
So in Congress,
in all parties,
yeah.
100%. But I'm saying,
Yeah.
obviously, you have that personal connection with people that you served with. So
right. And here's what I told them. Here's what I've told some of my Democratic colleagues. When I spoke on the House floor after one of my colleagues slandered Israel, started invoking some of the anti-Israel tropes, anti-Zionist tropes that we now hear regularly in these protests around the country, the response was very strong. People were glad that I spoke out. What I've encouraged my former colleagues to do is to speak out every time any member of the House of Representatives stands and takes a position that is not just anti-Israel, but that is so virulently anti-Israel and that is laced with anti-Zionism, and call them out for singling out the one Jewish state in the world and saying that state doesn't have a right to exist. Unless we stand together and call out that kind of language, then we'll see only more of it on our college campuses, more of it at protests. And we don't have to ask anymore, Tzvika, what globalize the Intifada means. One only needs to look at what just happened in Amsterdam to understand that further. That kind of language should not be acceptable when it comes from anyone, least of all the mouths of members of the United States House of Representatives. I should say most of all. We should never accept that kind of language.
100%. So Ted Deutch, thank you so much for what you do for the Jewish people, what you do for Israel. And let's hope the next time we meet will be about some positive developments and the returning of the hostages, as you mentioned. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Chika. Look forward to seeing you again soon.